President, please be seated. The court is now back in session. Before giving the floor to the international co-counsel for Mr. Kieu Sompon to resume her questioning, I would like to give the floor to the co-prosecutor, particularly the international co-prosecutor, to respond to the questions put by Judge Lavange in the previous session. Do you have any basis for your answers?
Thank you, Mr. President. Good afternoon, Your Honors, and to Counsel. I just wanted to respond briefly to the questions raised by Judge Laverne. As I believe Counsel noted before the break, this filing is indeed a Rule 87-4 filing. You will see in the left-hand column of the annexes that were distributed that some of these documents have a Case 2 number. Those documents that have a Case 2 number have been disclosed already. Those that do not have a Case 2 number are being disclosed at the time of this filing, this Rule 87-4 filing. You will further note that all of the statements for the gentleman who is currently on the stand have a Case 2 number. You will note that there was mention made of a statement of an individual who has already testified in this segment, Mr. Prak Khan. His statement also has a Case 2 number. There is also an additional individual who will be testifying in this segment, 2 TCW 816. His statement also has a Case 2 number. So all of those in relation to these witnesses have been disclosed already. There are other statements that are included in this Rule 87-4 application that have some content related to S21. In addition, there are statements that have content related to future trial segments and past trial segments. Those that have content related to S21 that do not have a Case 2 number at this time, that we are disclosing at the same time as this 87-4 application, do not fall into the categories that we have been instructed to disclose by this chamber. You will recall that pursuant to your decision E363/3, we are obligated to disclose documents that are either statements by proposed witnesses, statements that have potentially exculpatory information, and we also include documents that we have been ordered to disclose pursuant to a ruling by the Supreme Court chamber following a request by the Nuencia defense. So those are the categories of documents that we disclose. This chamber, in that same ruling, instructed us to disclose all other documents at the same time as our Rule 87-4 applications. And so for those documents in this filing that do not have Case 2 numbers, that is what is occurring. We are disclosing at the same time as our Rule 87-4 filing. So just to be absolutely clear, we are, to the best of our ability, following the rulings of this trial chamber regarding our disclosure and 87-4 obligations, and all parties and the trial chamber had access to the documents of witnesses that have testified in this segment, are testifying or will testify in this segment, that are included in this list already. I'm at your liberty to answer any further questions you might have.
យើងមើលខ្លឹមសារនេះគឺ
I have read the content of the request in relation to the admissibility of documents into evidence. It is not a mere request of a disclosure. That is one point for your clarification. And before us, it concerns 5 documents, that is the written records of the interviews of witnesses in relation to the current witness as well and other witnesses who came to testify in relation to S21. That is the concern and the challenge for the chamber. The chamber did not put the question in relation to the request to disclose the documents, but your request has something to do with the request to admit documents in the annex. So please do not respond beyond what the chamber has asked you. So the question is about the request to admit the written records, the 5 written records of the interviews of witnesses who have already testified, and also in relation to this witness. Please clarify this point for the chamber.
Thank you, Mr. President. Allow me to clarify, focusing specifically on the 5 statements of witnesses relating to the S21 segment. All 5 of those statements have already been disclosed. The 3 statements of the gentleman who is currently testifying were disclosed on 29 January 2016 and 10 March 2016, respectively. You will find those disclosure filings at E319/40, E319/41. There are 2 remaining statements of witnesses that will be that have been called or will be called in this segment. The first is of Mr. Prak Khan, who came to testify. His statement was disclosed on the 26th of April 2016. That is filing E319/46, and in addition was circulated by email on the 25th of April 2016 to this chamber and to all of the parties. And the second is of a future witness, witness 2 TCW 816. His statement was disclosed on 26 April 2016, and that was filing E319/46.
យើងបញ្ជាក់
President, I do not really understand your explanation. My question is to you. Why you have just made the request to admit those 5 statements which has been long been disclosed? So why you filed that 5 statement for admission in the last minute? Why you have just requested the admissibility of the 5 statements today?
I apologize for not
សូមលោកបញ្ជាក់ថាយើងអត់ចង់
I am not asking you about the disclosure of the 5 statements. My question is to you is that the 5 statements have been disclosed for quite a period of time, and why you have just made a request to admit the 5 statements?
I apologize for misunderstanding your question, Mr. President. We, as as all of the parties function under restraints of resources, we, in our internal processes of reviewing all of the documents that are placed on case 3 and 4, requesting disclosure from OCIJ, and then disclosing and or providing justification pursuant to 87.4, prioritize the disclosure of documents. We place our resources primarily on the disclosure of documents so that as much as possible the Chamber and the parties have access to those documents as soon as possible. As our resources allow, we then go back to those documents that we would like to request to have admitted pursuant to Rule 87.4 and do the additional work to attempt to justify pursuant to Rule 87.4 those documents. And that is why at times the Rule 87.4 application will come sometime after the actual disclosure of those documents.
Judge Lavange, you put a question, so you want to put more question or any clarification? If no, the floor is given to the defense team of the accused to resume the questioning. You may proceed.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. President. I will continue with the examination of the witness. I do not quite understand the rationale for the applications made by the co-prosecutors, insofar as we don't have access to those documents and we face certain delays, which means that the week you have granted us to prepare for future witnesses called to testify will be further curtailed upon, and we intend to file an application in that regard. Mr. Witness, when we broke off, we were talking about the place where you were working, which was at a certain distance from the entrance on the perimeter of the school, which was known as S21, and you stated that you stood guard among the external guards near the Beehive radio station. We heard another witness, Prakan, state that he also stood guard at that location, and he described that place, explaining that there was a zinc fence which marked the limit of that particular location was at about 10:38, and this is how he described the fence, and I quote, "There was another fence in wood. The second level of the fence was covered with barbed wire. There was a fire station directly opposite that fence. My question is whether that is the fence which was not far from where you were, and was the gate directly opposite the fire station?"
Regarding the fence, that fence, in fact, the house was located to the east of the fence, close to the sewage canal.
Donc, si je comprends bien,
So if I understand you correctly, and please correct me if I am wrong, when a vehicle wanted to enter the building of S21, which includes buildings A, B, C, and so on and so forth, that vehicle would have had to pass through a first fence, a first gate, and then it would pass a second fence which directly surrounded the buildings. Is that your testimony?
That is correct. But as usual, the vehicles would first pass through the gates in the east and then went into the second fence. And I could not tell you about what happening in the north and also in the west, since the gates were closed on those particular locations.
Si les portails étaient fermés à...
If the gate was closed at that location, does that mean that there was only one possible entrance, which is where you were stationed?
Yes, there was only one entrance for vehicles to go in, with the guards standing at that location. And whenever there were vehicles coming in, I would be informed, and then I went to receive and to welcome the vehicles.
Comment est-ce que vous pouviez savoir qu'un véhicule...
How could you know that a vehicle was authorized to enter the premises?
The regulation was that drivers were not allowed to drive the vehicles into the compound. It was only me and my men were allowed to drive the vehicles arrives into the compound.
Est-ce que je dois comprendre que...
Should I take it from your answer that when a vehicle arrived, the driver that had driven the vehicle up to where you were would alight from the vehicle, and you would be the person who would enter the vehicle and then enter the compound of S21? Is that your testimony?
When a car would arrive, there were guards. I, together with other men, there were drivers. So the driver who had driven the vehicle was asked to go out, and I and my men would replace him to drive the vehicle in, and there were guards protecting that vehicle as well.
Je voudrais savoir si vous savez, vous de votre...
I would like to know whether you knew who had instituted that procedure and who had built that security perimeter around the S21 buildings.
Duke had the authority to set out the procedures.
Et c'est lui qui vous a fait part de cette procédure directement?
And was Duke the person who conveyed that procedure to you, or it was another of your superiors who did so?
When there were any kind of procedures, the whole asked me and other forces to install the fence to block the road, block people and vehicles from coming in. And usually we used zinc or other type of wires to use as fence.
Prakan, toujours à l'audience.
Prakan, still at the hearing of the 2nd of May 2016, and shortly before 10:41 and 29 seconds, explains the procedure as follows. Before opening the gate to let anyone in, no official document had to be shown. If I opened the gate, it was because I recognized the truck and the driver, end of quote, free translation. And furthermore, in his testimony, he appears to say that drivers were authorized to get in, but they first of all had to be recognized. So my question to you is as follows. When you state that you would sit in the place of the driver who brought the vehicle, are you talking of S21 drivers, or you're talking of other drivers from somewhere else?
In fact, the drivers from my group replaced the one who had brought the vehicle in.
Mais est-ce que...
However, were the vehicles not always S21 vehicles?
As for vehicles, some of those vehicles could only stop at the zinc fence. The drivers would get off, and I and my drivers would go in together with the guards standing at the back of the vehicles, and then the vehicles would be driven into the compound, and some of those vehicles were from the state ministries.
Et qu'est-ce que vous faisiez ensuite de ces véhicules?
And what did you do when you had to deal with vehicles that were not S21 vehicles?
Their vehicles, together with the prisoners, would drive. In fact, we would drive the vehicles of the vehicles of the people who had brought the vehicles to the location, and after we, together with other guards, drop off the prisoners, we would drive the vehicle back outside the compound.
Donc si je comprends bien...
So if I understand your testimony correctly, what you're saying is that no one who was not a member of the S21 staff could enter the premises. Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. There was one day when I was off duty. I and my men were busy with feeding the livestock, and I was also growing banana trees at the time. At the time, a vehicle arrived, and we were not there at the time, who came out and blamed all of us for not standing guard at the location, and later on we were instructed not to leave our workstation and to be on constant guard duty.
Un autre point que je souhaiterais vous faire préciser.
I would like you to clarify another point. Did you have any particularly friendly relations with Long and Teng?
បាទខ្ញុំ
I could make a contact with Ta Ho but not Ta Peng. When Ta Pang was arrested and placed and held at the Beehive radio station, 3 of us, including me, were instructed to walk the prisoners, and at the time I was required to walk Tapang, and at the time I took the occasion to answer Tapang who he was implicating, and he said he implicated Ta Ho, and at the time I learned previously that Ho and Duc had arguments, and I was thinking that if Tapang was interrogated, he would implicate Ta Ho, then Ta Ho would be arrested and it was my turn. So after I walked Ta Pang into the compound and went back, I went to talk to Ta Ho about that case. I was very concerned at the time on a constant basis that I would be arrested one day after the arrest of Ta Ho.
Je vais revenir sur ce point.
I will revisit this point subsequently, but I would like you to answer my questions that are twofold. You said that you didn't have any particular relations with Teng, but I would like to know whether you had any particularly friendly relations with Teng. Could you please answer this initial question?
បាទខ្ញុំ
I did not trust Peng because Peng could get along with Duc. So I had a good relation with Ho, since Ho had previously had the relation with Pang.
Je vous pose cette question.
I put this question to you because a while ago, in answer to a question put to you by my colleague of the non-chair team, you stated that Ta Peng talked to you about these activities regarding executions, and he talked about that at a point in time, and you stated that you did not have the right to talk to interrogators, and that there was a notion of secrecy, and you referred to that on several occasions during your testimony. I would like to know whether you know why Peng, with whom you didn't have any particular relations, told you about details of his work as an executioner, which he was not supposed to share with you.
Mr. President, this has come up before in relation to the same topic. Counsel is asking the witness to speculate on the motivation of another person, and that's not an appropriate question.
I was simply asking the witness if he had any kind of special relations, and he said that he didn't trust him. He didn't trust Peng, so I believe that this is a legitimate question because he himself spoke to us about the notion of secrecy and the fact that he was not supposed to speak to the interrogators. So I believe that this is a legitimate question. I believe it's legitimate to ask him why Peng spoke to him. He can say many things about the kind of relationship you had with him, but I don't know. But if he doesn't know, he doesn't know. But that's why I'm asking the question. So I think the question is perfectly legitimate in relation to what the witness has just described to us about his relationship with Peng.
President. The question is permissible and the objection by the Deputy Co-Prosecutor is overruled. And witness, you may respond to the question. Do you recall the last question put to you? If so, please respond. Witness, please repeat the question.
No problem. Let me rephrase it. You said to the chamber that you did not have any kind of special relationship with Peng, that you did not trust him because he was close to Duik and you were rather close to Ho, who did not get along well with Duik. So insofar that you spoke to us about the fact that normally you were not expected to speak with any of the interrogators or to speak with people who are not part of your group, can you tell us why Peng confided in you, even though this was violating the principles of secrecy? Why did he confide in you about the executions that he took part in?
In 1977, the rules were not that strict and we could speak to one another. However, I did not have any daily conversation with him, and I was very careful about Peng since he was closer to Dutch. Later on, they imposed a regulation that we were prohibited from speaking to one another and that each of us had to monitor the activity of another staff. Because that was the time that the staff of the center had been subject to the arrest.
When in time do you place the moment when the rules changed?
I cannot recall the exact period. However, that was the time that they started to arrest the staff working inside the center. We were prohibited from having any conversation with one another, and that combatant has to be monitored by cadres and vice versa. And from that day onward, each of us was by ourselves. After we ate meal, we would return to our sleeping quarter, and we did not dare to speak to one another since we were afraid of being monitored and arrested.
You said that the moment when Peng was able to speak to you still was in 1977. So do you remember if this was the first half of 77 or during the second half of 77? Can you try to locate that moment? I know this goes back a while, but could you give us an idea of when?
I cannot recall it, although I knew that it happened in 1977, and by 1978 the situation became even more intensified after X-21 staff were arrested.
Avant d'arriver.
Before we discuss this period, you said yesterday, a little bit after 9:26 and 41 seconds, when you were answering a question put to you by the co-prosecutor, you said that at one point in time you were selected to become an interrogator. So can you tell us who selected you to do that, and do you remember when, during which period this happened?
Actually, it started since after they organized groups of interrogators, and that happened in 1977 when the interrogator groups were established, and I was called to be part of the groups, but I declined that, since I said I did not know how to write letters, and I preferred to be a guard. But in fact, I was afraid to be an interrogator.
ยังឲ្យខ្ញុំ
So then I was assigned to work at the place to receive the prisoners.
I don't have much time left, so please listen to me as carefully as possible, because I'm trying to put to you precise questions. So my question was, who proposed to you to become an interrogator?
Ho, Dutch deputy, actually asked me to be an interrogator, but I said I did not know how to write, so I could not do that. But I could stand guard. So he assigned me as a member of a group to be stationed on guard at the Beehive radio station.
So when you told Hor that you would not accept that job, there was no problem for you to be assigned to another one. Is that what I must understand from what you just said?
Yes, because he also noticed that I did not know how to write the letter, and that's why he assigned me to be a guard, and indeed I did not know how to write.
Now I'm turning to a period that's a little bit after. You said that at one point in time you were implicated in a confession, and this is why you were transferred to Presol. Maybe I didn't note this down carefully, but can you please tell us again who implicated you in the confession and who announced to you that you were going to be transferred to Presol?
It was Dutch who reassigned me to work in the rice fields at the June 8. Dutch arrested Ngoon, and during the interrogation, Ngoon implicated me that I planned to rebel at the Tul's Lane, and during a study session, Dutch asked me on the spot that whether I actually planned to initiate a rebellion, since Ngoon implicated me. And I said, how could I do that? And that was nonsense that he implicated me, that's what I said. And several days later, Dutch sent his messenger to relocate weapons from the warehouse to the general staff office, and later on I was assigned to work in the rice field. President interrupts. Mr. Witness, please limit your response to the limit of the question, and don't answer much more than that, as the extra answers may not contribute to the assessment of the truth, and as you have heard, the counsel has a very limited time left. And as for you, you have been asked several hundreds questions already, so please limit your response.
Donc je comprends que c'est
So I understand that it was Duke who informed you about you being implicated in the confession, and it was his messenger who told you that you would be transferred to Presar. So did you speak about this transfer to Hall?
The Hall asked me to prepare myself for the relocation to Brazil. But I knew that their instruction came from that Dutch, because that Dutch knew of the implication that I planned a rebel, and for that reason he wanted to split the forces within our group.
et
And did Hall tell you that he spoke about your case to Duke?
I did not know about that.
et
And being transferred is the only thing that happened to you following your implication in the confession?
បាទ
Yes.
un
A last point that I'd like to cover with you. You said that you attended training sessions, and you also spoke about the conditions at the battlefront and about Vietnamese incursions. So my question is, at S-21, were you being apprised of what was going on at the border? And more generally speaking, about the situation of the fighting during the entire period you were at S-21?
When I was assigned to go to Spraring to bring in Vietnamese prisoners, the East Zone soldiers spoke to me about the situation as well. And on the day that I went to bring in the Vietnamese prisoners of war, I saw about 60 new Chinese trucks. And actually they prepared those trucks loaded with weapons from Division 703, and they were in a ready position to fight against the Vietnamese. And I knew that the situation will become worse, and that it would spread even through the northern part of Svay Rieng province. And that's what was in my mind at the time.
et cet événement, vous le situez à quel
And when did this event happen? What was the date?
That happened in 1977.
Là encore, je vois
Here again, I'd like to know if there's any way you can remember exactly when in 1977 this happened. Was it rather at the beginning, rather in the middle, rather towards the end of 1977?
I do not recall that. After the Vietnamese soldiers were arrested, I did not know how they communicated with Dutch, maybe via a telephone line. Then Dutch assigned us to take a truck to go and pick them up.
Maintenant, j'en
Now I'd like to turn back to the period after this event. So when you were in S21, do you remember if this context of war was brought up at any point in time during your training?
When Son Sen came to teach us, he spoke about the enemy and that we have to defend against the enemy and that we had to fight against Vietnam.
Did he, however, provide any details about the situation at the front line, or did he only speak about general issues? Did he speak about any specific battles that were fought and where?
I cannot recall that. I cannot recall the specific detail. He only spoke about the fighting against the Vietnamese and that we actually entered into the Vietnamese territory, and that's what he told us at the political school.
Monsieur le Président, j'en ai terminé.
Mr. President, I'm done with my cross-examination.
President, thank you, Counsel. Mr. Him Hui, the Chamber is grateful of your presence and the hearing of your testimony as a witness is now concluded. Your testimony may contribute to the ascertainment of the truth in this case. You are no longer required to be present in the courtroom and you may return to your residence or wherever you wish to go to. The Chamber wishes you all the very best. The Chamber would like to extend our thanks to Mr. Mom Rati, the Duty Counsel, and your both excused. And court officer, please work with Visu to arrange transportation for Mr. Him Hui to return to his residence or wherever he wishes to go to. The Chamber will adjourn the proceeding now and will resume on Monday 23rd May 2016, commencing from 9 o'clock in the morning. And on that Monday, the Chamber will hear testimony of a witness to TCW 816 in relation to S21 Security Center. This information is for the parties and the general public. Security personnel were instructed to take the two accused, Nuchi and Kirsampon, back to the detention facilities and have them return to attend the proceedings on Monday 23rd May 2016 before 9 o'clock in the morning. The court is now adjourned.